Hey everybody, it's Ryan here today again, and you're wherever you are. Hey, today we're going to talk about a relatively unknown studio. Nobody's ever heard of them. They've only developed a handful of very niche titles. Of course, I'm talking about CD Projekt Red, a famously unknown entity in the gaming industry. In all seriousness, I know the story we're going to be talking about today is about the major restructuring that CD Projekt Red announced. I do know that this story is from last week and you're all tired of hearing about Cyberpunk and CD Projekt Red. I get it. There's like 600,000 videos out about it, but I felt this was interesting and I wanted to discuss it. And of course, I'm not someone here who breaks news or gets exclusive tips. So the aim here is not to pretend like this just broke and I am right on top of it. It is to go a little deeper into it and analyze it and give you my thoughts. Really, I wanted to take some time and think about this some more and research a bit. So I went to Poland, talked to some of the devs at CD Projekt, and I just got back right this moment and recorded this video. Come on, really? I didn't do that shit. So piece by piece, let's get into this. One last thing, if you end up liking the video, consider subscribing. If not to me, to someone else maybe you'll like better. I am not so high-minded to think that I'm great, but it'd be cool if you did think that. Yeah. So CD Projekt Red made some news again the other day, and this time in a much less controversial way than they're used to in the past few months. They even announced the CD Projekt Red 2.0 strategy. It includes big changes to development, communication, marketing, and more. They release a 24-minute strategy video outlining all of this. It'll be linked in case you want to check it out down below, but we all know that I hit the mic, you are gonna stay here instead, right? Right? I'm gonna try and focus on the important bits or things that I found the most interesting and dive into it. Dive. Like that. So this might be a little longer of a video, so I'll try and do those markers on the video on YouTube that the people that you know do that are better than I am. So if you want to listen to a specific portion, you can. Now bear with me, as I have never done it before, so you need to give me a few minutes to figure it out. So give me a second. I can't do it until the video is uploaded, so. The following comes from GameSpot's Eddie Makuch. I don't know. The Polish studio covered all of this in the video below. Starting off, the company said it wants to focus on quality as its top priority, which is a significant thing to say following the troubled launch of Cyberpunk 2077 in December that the studio is still addressing. The studio also said it wants to continue to create revolutionary new IP in the world of story-driven RPGs, while the developer wants to be known as one of the world's top 3 video game developers as part of this new effort. Okay, let's start with the obvious. We all know the trouble surrounding the Cyberpunk launch. I have covered it here multiple times, so I won't hammer on the game again, except to say what I have continued to say is that I enjoyed the game a lot despite its issues. The story was very good in a lot of ways, and its side missions with the various characters were just incredible. It just had a lot of bugs and glitches and performance issues. On top of that, there's a hollowness to the game. I think it's palatable in some instances. None of that is new. We've known this. They released multiple patches and fixes, and again, just the other day, they released the largest patch yet for the game. I'll probably get into it a little bit later as well, but they even say a few times in the video that the release did not meet their standards of quality. That's CD Projekt Red saying it this time, that's not me, okay? So what I take away from this is that from the way CD Projekt Red is putting it, that they want to not only fix what they did wrong, but also push themselves further and beyond this to do even more ambitious things in their development of their titles. They also describe how they want to change their workplace around, their turnaround in development, and their engine, and how they communicate with the press and fans. So let's continue with that article down below. Not down below, but you know what I meant. On the engine changes, CD Projekt Red said it aims to centralize the company's engine to support 2 franchises at once. As an example, the studio said things like NPC behavior, routines, or player character control systems for one game can be carried over to the other. For team restructures, CD Projekt Red said it plans to have cross-functional teams where developers work on multiple games at the same time. These teams will blend disciplines and expertise, so we will have a closer communication and skill sharing going on from the beginning. The studio said it's a much more agile approach to game development. So essentially how I read this is that CD Projekt Red wants to develop their single player games basically back to back, and that's how they're describing the process. The Red engine, which is the game engine they use for The Witcher and I believe Cyberpunk, they aim to be taking it a step further to make it more seamless, making it easier for, say, someone on the team to share ideas and collaborate as as they develop different titles, or what it sounds like, even develop games simultaneously. So someone starts their week or their day with The Witcher and then ends it on Cyberpunk possibly or probably. I don't think it's a new concept, to be honest. Maybe it doesn't take quite the same form and it's not the same thing entirely, but I know EA, for example, would force all its studios to develop on the Frostbite engine, much to the chagrin of some of their studios. It's not uncommon anyway that studios may take some resources or assets from other games or even a style from their other game and take it from game to game that they develop. A more recent example, if you want to look at it, is Ghost of Tsushima. It's very faint, but you can kind of see a resemblance, a small one at that, and how Jin jumps. His name is Jin. How Jin jumps and how Delsin or Cole jumps in Infamous. Of course, these titles play differently. I'm not saying that they're the same, but it's not uncommon for studios to share a certain DNA between their IPs. I would show you a side by side, but I don't have gameplay footage of Infamous, so you'll have to take my word for it, or you can call me a dirty liar. I generally don't know how simultaneous developments of projects is going to pan out, but it appears that is something we won't even be thinking about until 2022. Recall about a year and a half ago, CD Projekt Red reached a new agreement with the author of the Witcher series after a bit of a dispute to license the IP out for more games, and even with Cyberpunk doing very well, despite the launch issues, it's not unreasonable to expect that they want to take on both of these IPs as their main ones and keep them at the forefront of whatever they do. In regards to how CD Projekt Red will change its communication going forward, the studio acknowledges issues with Cyberpunk 2077 in this department. We see things that need to be changed in the future, the studio said. This will include marketing and PR campaigns that will be much shorter, the studio said. The developer will wait until much closer to a game's launch to show a trailer, demos, or an announcement event that goes in depth on mechanics. CD Projekt Red may still release teasers for new projects very early in their development, however, but you shouldn't expect a series like Cyberpunk 2077's Night City Wire series to continue until much closer to a game's release in the future. What CD Projekt Red will talk about going forward will change too, as the studio plans to focus much more on polished game footage, not concepts, while the studio will showcase its games on all platforms that it will be available on. This seems to be directly in response to Cyberpunk 2077's marketing, which focus on the next-gen and PC editions of the game and not the Xbox One and PS4 versions that have many more issues. Now, it goes without saying, but if you release a bad, broken, and buggy game, it doesn't really matter how much of it is showed off, it's still shit. Now, I'm not saying this in reference to Cyberpunk per se, I'm just saying in general. I actually did like Cyberpunk. I'm just saying that if you release a bad, broken, and buggy game, and you show off a lot of it, it's still gonna be bad. It doesn't matter. But like we talked about the other day with like Biomutant, and how the communication or lack of communication from the developer actually left the game in a state of mystery, but in doing so, it allowed the studio to kind of hunker down and really focus on polishing the game rather than building a sense of anticipation that will never be able to be met. You'll never be able to match it. Think about it like this. Your buddy tells you about a movie. They're going on and on and on about a movie they saw that was awesome. They tell you how revolutionary it was, and they're urging you to go and see it and watch it. So you decide one day you're going to turn it on, you'll watch it, and your mind is running with all these grandiose expectations of what to expect and how it's going to be. And then you finally watch it and you're just like, that was it? That's kind of what happens, or what I think happens, not just with Cyberpunk, but a lot of games in this industry, is that hype is built up and it'll never be matched. It just won't. Overall, I think I'm a little encouraged by this. It's a good move for them. Until you solidify game mechanics and ideas, I think it makes sense to hold back on promising anything. It's like if I said I was going to do 30 videos this week and then I only made 4. You would say, well, that fell short of the expectations you set, Ryan. Also, I think it makes sense to communicate to the audience more directly what is going on. Like, reveal the game on all consoles, maybe even a demo, and let us see how it performs so we know which platforms are having the most issues. Delays suck, no doubt about that. But if a game needs to be delayed for polish, I don't see an issue with that. It's like I said, in reference to them talking about the release not being their standard of quality, beyond even communicating what's in the game, the bottom line is if you get to a point where you're afraid to show off every version of your product, or even allow reviewers the ability to check out one edition of the game, it means maybe it needs more work. I am not a developer, obviously, or maybe it's not obvious, I don't know. But it seems to me if you are afraid to show people, then you know you messed up. Afraid to show people your game, that is. Or at the very least, you're a bit nervous about what you have. After all, it was a whole thing, if you recall, for multiple weeks about how CD Projekt Red faked the demos and trailers for Cyberpunk before they really had most of the game built. And then CD Projekt Red said, no. That's not exactly faked. And it was reported words are hard for me. bear with me. It was reported that they cut a lot of features to meet the game's release window, and it's just a whole mess of issues. You also can recall the infamous Peter Molyneux, formerly of Lionhead Studios, who would talk relentlessly and hype features of the Fable games for them to either be missing from the final product or to not be implemented in quite the way that he described. I remember this quite well. Great guy, really. To be clear, I'm not trying to compare the scenarios here, I'm just giving you examples just to kind of draw the parallels. I'm worried that it sounded like I was suggesting that CD Projekt Red did in fact fake some of those gameplay demos and previews and whatnot, and I just wanted to clarify, it's been reportedly hard for developers to even get those previews and or demos together because with games, they're all not ready until one day they just kind of are. In a way, all previews are kind of faked in the sense of they're likely not a real accurate representation of the game because things change in development. I do think it's fair to say, based on what you saw and or were told, the previews misled you into believing the game was something it wasn't, but I find the suggestion that it was completely fake rather inflammatory considering the nature of game development, at least from what I know. Of course, don't take my word for that, I could be totally wrong, but just based on what I have read and heard, it's notoriously difficult to put those preview builds together to begin with. I would cite some sources for this, but I don't have any, so you can just take these comments with a grain of salt if you like. Okay, next. CD Projekt Red will now only focus on a single year at a time when it comes to content roadmaps. For 2021, this roadmap includes updates for Cyberpunk 2077 and the Witcher franchise. CD Projekt Red also reiterated that next-gen versions of the Cyberpunk of The Witcher 3 and Cyberpunk 2077 remain in development and are scheduled to release in 2021. This was then followed by an image that shows off the same thing. CD Projekt Red will now be working off a one-year plan as opposed to the 5-year model they previously worked with, and I think that's going to allow them to be a bit more responsive maybe to communities and fans. They're obviously still working on patches and fixes for Cyberpunk, and they'll even release free DLCs like they did with The Witcher 3, and then after the next-gen update, they'll release more. And speaking of The Witcher 3, remember that game? How can't you? It's everyone and their mother's favorite game. The Witcher 3 is still projected to get its next-gen upgrade, same thing, sometime this year. Going off of this, I want to turn to something that I think has been kind of misreported or misrepresented. It kind of falls in line with the roadmap they laid out here. Reportedly, CD Projekt Red planned a multiplayer component either for Cyberpunk 2077 or it was meant to be a separate game that was an online game. They even said in this video that they would reconsider whether they would focus on multiplayer or not. I've seen a number of headlines just kind of misrepresenting this as they canceled the multiplayer game or component for Cyberpunk outright because of the situation around the game. I feel like they're not wrong to draw that conclusion per se because it's a similar one I might draw. I get it, but what I mean more is that it seems like they're reconsidering the whole approach as a studio to multiplayer. You're hearing this a lot now from developers that they want to integrate online components more into their games or even multiplayer. So the way I interpret it is they're more prioritizing the primary aspect of the games that they make and hoping with their restructuring and planning they can almost integrate these ideas without causing a deficiency to one or the other. Liana Rupert at GameInformer I think wrote it up accurately and she cited the video in question. She wrote in her article, "In a recent investors call, seen in the video down below, CD Projekt Red President Adam Kaczynski, I think I pronounced that right, I hope, made a passing comment regarding the multiplayer component that was expected to arrive in 2022. According to Kaczynski, or K, whatever, the team is currently reconsidering whether or not multiplayer should be a focus or even a thing at all. That being said, he did add that online features for Cyberpunk are still important, saying, we are focusing on bringing online into all of our franchises one day. With The Witcher reportedly getting a new take on the horizon, it will be interesting to see how the online component impacts a famously single-player adventure like the fantasy franchise. Whether or not that reconsideration will mean a total axe of the multiplayer mode remains to be seen at this time, but leadership did say that there is still more work to be done to right where the launch of Cyberpunk 2077 went wrong. Now, to be fair, I think that's more in line with CD Projekt Red's comments about the multiplayer component or multiplayer game, so I think saying that they just up and canceled it is just a bit of like jumping the gun. I get why they would say that because it certainly sounds that way, but I don't think it's something that they have rolled out entirely. I think for CD Projekt Red, it just sounds like they're saying like, hey, we're just gonna try to get back on track, which I think with the latest update of Cyberpunk, they're starting to. But clearly it's not just like big patch out, it's over. There's clearly more work to be done, and even the latest update adds its own issues, which other previous updates have done that as well. There's a whole part of the video where they talk about branching out more and doing other forms of media with their IP, like TV shows and mobile games, books, comics, etc. That's not really that interesting as far as what we were talking about here, which is the gaming part of it all, but I suppose it does speak to how CD Projekt Red is kind of eyeing themselves as the people who are going to expand their medium beyond just the games, and they want to establish themselves as a studio to be associated with and work with. That was a struggle to get out. Which also leads us into the next part, where CD Projekt Red also plans on doing some more mergers and acquisitions in order to kind of bolster their resources and support studios. Again, just overall allowing them to do or have more of that flexibility. They started by acquiring a studio that already supported them with Cyberpunk Digital Scapes. That'll give them some representation in the Vancouver, Canada area. You knew. Yes, you can do geography. Essentially what they're doing, CD Projekt Red in all respects, is doing some major overhauls to restore the faith in them that everyone once had in them as a studio. One more piece from the video quoting the GameSpot article here I want to share, and I think this kind of summarizes everything we've talked about up until this point. CD Projekt Red also shared a slide that shows off what the studio aims to offer with its future games. This includes a further blending of genres, more online connectivity, expanding its franchises to new markets like mobile, as well as to mediums beyond gaming. CD Projekt Red also aims to have parallel IP development, meaning multiple AAA games from the different franchises and works at the same time instead of one after the other. The parallel AAA game development is expected to begin in 2022, but CD Projekt Red did not reveal which games or franchises will be included. I think it's pretty clear that they have planned out that Cyberpunk and The Witcher are going to be their two major IPs, and they will be working on back to back. There's an image that they showed which kind of illustrates the idea. They indicated many times in the video they wanted to do more genre blending, while also keeping the core of their game single-player RPGs with some kind of online component thrown in. Everything else is stuff I already went over. One thing I missed is how, through the restructuring of their studio, they hope to make a much more healthy work environment. CD Projekt Red has been under scrutiny before for crunch timelines, not just with Cyberpunk, but, well, with Cyberpunk mainly because they said that they weren't doing it and then they did it, so yeah. And they discussed how they want to avoid that in the future by electing representatives in the studios to represent teams so they can get more feedback, and hopefully that will contribute to a more, as they say, comfortable workspace or working environment. Now again, all of this goes to the core of what we've been talking about this whole time, and even other videos beyond this one. Clearly something went wrong with Cyberpunk, or CD Projekt Red for Cyberpunk, that didn't click like it did with The Witcher 3. A lot of this stuff seems positive, but I wouldn't blame anyone for waiting to see what it turns out, because they took a lot of goodwill they had and just used all of it up. I still see them as an incredibly talented studio with a lot to offer the industry, and my hope is that this does pan out positively for them, because it does sound cliche, but talk is cheap. So I know that was quite a bit of information to absorb and wrap your head around. Ultimately, the thing I wanted to do here is give a bit of an analysis on what all this means, and my thoughts are by no means the end-all be-all, nor did I want to sound super reactionary or aggressive, because I'm not here to just crap on CD Projekt Red. I really wanted to have that discussion. Also, I want to remind people, as a slight defense of CD Projekt Red, at least in my mind, having played The Witcher 2, The Witcher 3, and some Gwent, though I didn't really like Gwent much, they only really botched one release for me, and even then, I do like Cyberpunk. If you think about it too, the first Witcher game, from what I know and have seen, is arguably the skeleton of what The Witcher 3 inevitably ended up being, and from then it's clear they're an ambitious studio, so I do remain hopeful. So look, to me, they're still a talented studio, and again, I don't know how this whole restructuring will work out for them, but obviously I hope it does, because I do like their games. I understand some of you might be tired of hearing about CD Projekt Red or Cyberpunk, but I think for them, it's probably just time to just quietly work on their games and their titles and what they're doing, and work to improve it, and get those next-gen upgrades out for that, for Cyberpunk, and for The Witcher 3. And look, I know that's something I've continued to harp on in all of my Cyberpunk videos, and I sound like a broken record, but beyond that, at least they have a plan in place to better the studio overall, and I think all of what we have discussed here sounds really solid and a good outline of what we can expect for them, or of them. Of course, I want to stress to you, please just don't take my word for any of this. Don't believe me. Really, do your own research and check out the links I have sourced if you want to see them for yourself and see where you land on all this, just because I think there's a kind of Cyberpunk fatigue, at least for me. We probably won't cover the game as much here going forward, as I think there's more interesting things to talk about, so until there's more substantial information or anything more interesting to report, this will probably be the last we talk about Cyberpunk and maybe CD Projekt Red for a while, until next week something happens and I go back on that, but you know what I meant. Finally guys, I leave it all in your hands to make of it what you will. Remember to like the video if you liked it, dislike it if you didn't, and consider subscribing if you got this far and want to see more of my content. Or go and check out someone else's content if you like them more, and subscribe to them. And if you think I missed anything or have a different take than I do and want to discuss anything further, please trees, please bring it up down below in the comments. Until next time, my friends, I bid you a fine farewell, and I hope you stay safe, happy, and healthy. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Oh, and I love you all. Maybe.